to these conversations to encourage the community to come forward with all these resources and knowledge and wisdom. So tell us what you've got.
Well, I think I just want to share, number one, the value of what you're doing. And I do have one question, if you don't mind. I actually have two. And I know when you were looking at your diagram, you didn't want to use the word genocide. You used the word delete. And why did you, and clarification, why did you choose delete over extinction?
Extension?
No, extinction.
Oh, extinction.
Extinction.
I didn't think of it. I mean, it is extinction, but the other thing is both extinction and genocide make people, a lot of people will just shut off completely. They don't want to have that conversation. Delete, they're used to knowing, and when you delete, it is an extinguish. So I just put it in because politically I thought it might be easier for people to absorb it and not shut down.
Actually, we have some different experiences around. I think a lot of people, because we're dealing with the fact of extinction in nature, what's happening in that. A lot of people can understand extinction as a word that's in our culture.
I'll change it.
Just a wonderment. So that
I'll put it in. I'll put it in. I want, by the way, on anything I do, give me feedback. If I can improve the work, I'll do it.
I got you. And I think I'm sorry, one of the things that's happened, just so you know, so if I feel a little scattered, we're actually going to have a meeting tomorrow. I was inviting some people too, with one of the other groups, and I just got word he's in the hospital. So,
oh, I'm sorry.
And I need to call some people in a little bit as well to try and let them know. So,
Introduce yourself to this audience just a little bit, and then tell them, keep going.
And I hope Rose will come back. Okay, Rose has just gone upstairs. She's having a little issue too. So we decided she needed to shift places.
Okay.
And I say that because one of the things is that Rose and I met each other in seminary, in Colgate Rogers Bexley Hall Crozier Seminary. I came there in 68, 69, interesting time of transition. Came in because I had made a change in my life from the model of the good Black folk who were going to show the model of how we can integrate and show folks that we're good enough, and go into the Air Force.
Yeah.
The issue was, in terms of ministry, I didn't want to be in a parish minister or anything like that, even though that's what a lot of the folks who I grew up with wanted me and saw me as a religious leader. I was going to try and cut a new way. That's why this is all kind of connected, of trying to be and being the leader. And since the services had such discrimination, especially the Air Force, it was only recently that Blacks were able to be in the Air Force and be able to be pilots. One of the early ones was a member of my congregation, Buddy Smith, Buzzy. And so I knew it was possible. But I've always had a commitment. I was born into a beloved community. And I say that I truly was. I didn't choose it. As you said, we're born into our families. I ended up being blessed with having an interracial, multiracial network of folks representing more ethnic groups that I could count. And being a family, and we lived as a family. We saw each other as related, and we loved each other. And we found out how to fight fair, how to grow from each other, and how to make everybody be part of the family.
How awesome.
And actually, in a time of segregation, the irony of that, we had a wonderful place in Columbus, Ohio. Place matters. Columbus was an interesting place during that era. Let me start that. I'm a war baby. I was the last of the war babies, 1944. So I start with that foot, but I never was in my mind. I was ahead of the time in terms of that sense. And I'm saying all this because that shaped me. I was born into this family in a geographic place that was kind of the melting pot of what we're talking about. North, south, east, and west. Columbus, Ohio was the market center. People would test the products there because they represented America in terms of people's choices and voices and stuff like that. So you got exposed to a lot of things in terms of what people valued and what they wanted to know. So early on, I've always had this curiosity about how do things really work? How do people really behave? and how do we decide to put things together to serve us? From a kid, that was just one of my interests. So that's just the way. And I always had these lenses. My lenses were never just, I will say I was enculturated within a Black culture. And my lenses, I always had my Cherokee and my Seminole heritages, African heritages, Irish, Scottish, French, white plantation owners were part of the Pinckney family, part of Alexander Hamilton family, Frederick Douglass is part of the heritages. So of course, I don't know what all that means when I'm growing up, except people thought it's important and made me think it was important. So those positive kinds of things. White people in my world, in that world, were fairly irrelevant, except within my family and around and at night when the police would come into the community. And that's one of the reasons our parents made sure we weren't out running around at night. Mm-hmm. But we had a huge backyard and stuff. All this is about how did I get shaped? So part of this, we were talking about is how we're individually created. So I kind of have this sense of seeing the world as the world and always never seeing just with one lens, but always try lenses, at least in terms of how I usually look at things. And I say that because I think what I've tried to do in much of my work as I've grown in different places in religion, I came into seminary at a moment in time where the ecumenical interfaith movement and the civil rights movement were working together and trying to change the culture. And integration was kind of that framework, if you will, the promised land of the time. We're going to create an integrated America, and ended up in Rochester, New York, which was one of those places, if you look at a moment in time, where the factors of Rochester was a corporate town, Kodak, dynamic and stuff. And so you had that whole, and I was part of the group from the community. Saul Alinsky came in. Saul was, I don't know, everybody knows Saul Alinsky, community organizer at that time, a leader within the citizen-based kind of organizing at that time. And the religious community at that time, which was trying to operate from all of us are God's people. And we're supposed to be working together. So those are the things that are blending. So it's my sense of I began to experience what I call the kick and the kiss of change and understanding and be able to see things that we needed both the forces and factors and understandings from the outside to attack and make accessible the inside to try and change. But if you only kicked from the outside, if you only tried to protest, what would happen is for a time you get a temporary change, but new people come in and become the people on the inside who can say do the same cycle.
Yep.
But then part of what we were doing is I was part of the early organizational development movement, working, integrating schools, trying to create model cities, communities, and things like that. So you had to begin with the fact that we started taking over some of those structures. We wanted to, instead of the city, I don't know if people know the Model Cities program. That's again my era.
Model Cities program.
Model Cities was a time in the 60s and 70s when community citizens would elect people to work in developing their communities and problems and housing and all these kinds of things. And money, millions and millions of dollars were available. But of course, the cities and others would always try and pump people onto the board that had their mentality. Yeah, okay, that's right. Thanks. Well, you can say, I'm mute, honey. You can say it. It was part of the war on poverty effort. And it was kind of the intentional nationally at that time, it was a national effort. But part of the irony is just what you're talking about. Of course, the local folks would want to get the money in, then they want to try and control the resources by trying to identify their community people and getting them on or doing stuff like that. And getting so they can control the resources and hinder authentic grassroots change. But we were working through the fight organization. We took on CODAV. We kind of won that stuff in terms of changing their culture, got other people involved. And then we moved to the school system, utilizing the same. So we took over, we closed down the school system.
Wow.
Got other people elected from the community and a cross-code of people who did have a different vision. And over a period of time, 10, 15 years, we actually had some significant transformative process. We set up a community school council, we called it, and we also did a pilot program within the school system. I was part of that. And it ended up setting a neighborhood street academy system, but it was within the school system. And in the community schools councils, we did a pilot program, a case study almost. Like we're going to learn to do from doing things differently in education within the school system. And we're going to see what we can learn from that. Does it make a difference in how kids learn, the impacts, how we involve parents and so forth? So that we broke all the traditional ways of how people operate.
That's awesome. You yourself were part of all those different things?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. How awesome is that?
Well, that's why I said it's not. That's why I said sometimes I see in this country there are things that happen in places that are really important, but we don't always know it. I mean, the reason all this started because when I went to seminary, I jumped the story a little bit. I went there. I was actually quite honestly involved in the Black empowerment movement at the time. One second, let me tell you. Hey, son, can I call you back, please? I'm in the middle seat. Are you okay? Okay, you're better. It's okay. I just want to make sure you're okay. Okay, love you. I mean, how did I know I was going to stumble into this? All I knew is that I was trying to, when King was killed, that some of us had to make a decision. I was sitting in the Ohio State University Union, student union, when we got the word that King had been killed.
That who?
That Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And I remember because the Ohio State Union is this huge all dining places and eating places, fun place where the students gathered. But one of the realities was the booths were the place where most of the kids of color gathered and kind of interacted and stuff. We have the tribes that in their spaces. We had kind of this middle area where people could come across their, on the other side, there was another big, huge sector where mostly white students were. It was this kind of middle ground, but sometimes people could be mixed up and around. I know that sounds crazy, but that's really true. And that was the culture. But on that occasion, one of the things that hit me was it came across and the word came in that he had died. And I had one of those moments in time as I felt myself shimmering and shivering and felt around me the trauma and the tears and the anxiety, the screams that were coming, the pain. And I remember also looking across the way, and there wasn't a lot of pain. Some people's paused for a moment or two. And it was almost on the white sector again. I'm using these kind of descriptive
contrast
in a sense. A few minutes, and some people paid attention. The kind of business kind of went back to usual. And then some other folks who were kind of closer to us were kind of a little longer in interacting. And in that moment in time, I remember feeling if I'd had a gun, I would have hurt somebody at that moment in time. Because I'd been committing my life to peace and justice, and we all love each other, and aren't we good? And how could you kill that? I said, well, the system is, so I'm sorry, Frank. Okay. And so it was one of those moments when I had to make a choice. And I said, if King is dead, instead of going to the Air Force and doing other things like that, which I left a step out of that, I resigned my commission because to be a pilot, I had to pass the Bombardier's Navigator's test. I did not know what the heck I was doing. I knew I had to get a certain score. I ended up one of the highest scores in the nation, which I had not. I don't know how the hell I did it because I was marking things. I'm being honest. Okay.
Yeah.
What I do know is my CO, when he got that, called me in to congratulate me and how good we had made. You know, nobody had done that for so long, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember when he said that, I said, so what you're excited about is that I can kill people better than others. And that's not what the purpose of my life is to be about. And I thought I could get away if I was going to be a chaplain in service and serving others, that would be okay. And no, it's not okay. And so I resigned my commission and put myself at risk in that sense. So that's before this happened. I was looking for purpose. What do I do? How do I find my way? King was killed very quickly, not quickly, but in that sense, I got the sense that he's dead, but the direction and the vision and the possibility of what he lifted up is not. But
Mhm,
both of us who are living have to make it real.
mhm.
If that's my ministry, if that's my commitment, if that's my passion, if that's my vision, then I want to commit to that as my life work.
Wow.
So that choice point, I really made that my commitment. And then is how do I learn how to do that? I had a lot of experiences from my own family and other places that no. But I actually took the next two, I skipped something, I'm gonna just leave it out. No, I'm gonna back it up. I'm doing what you were doing. I took the first couple of years of college and basically said, I'm going to learn people
Mhm.
and how people behave. And I knew a lot of that from being in the settings. I won't go into the whole history, but I've been in all kind of settings growing up, Western ways to be in places and spaces that many people wouldn't across race and class. But what it taught me is that what you were saying, the humanity, the commonness, when we get to see the actual heart and soul of people, are there in settings where that's possible? And so that began to say, how do we create those settings? How do we help people know? As I was saying, in the biblical sense, we were all the children of God at that time.
Mhm.
In this world of science, if we're all the children of Adam and Eve, then we're all related. So the issue is, my focus became on we're all human. And the issue is, how do we become humankind, in which all of us are valued and part of creating something that's nurturing and supportive to all. So anyway, that's framework. So wherever I've been, that's what I've tried to ask the question is, what do we need to be human, or what do I need to be human, my best human in this situation? And how can I work with others and being able to find their humanity?
Mhm.
And since, how do we find ways to, just what you're saying again earlier, we sometimes in our hearts know the same thing, our souls, but our language and our histories, our imprinting doesn't allow us to always know that. So how to not only hear what people say, but hear what they mean
Yeah.
and observe what they do, not what
Mhm.
So what I've tried to do is take those concepts into systems. How do you create healthy systems? And working with Pfeiffer and Jones and stuff, and university associates, taking over the human relations field to try and help it be collective and come together and develop a sense of cohesion to transmit and teach those principles.
Yeah.
Doing it in terms of working with setting up new models of how you integrate schools, in which the first opportunity when I was asked to take over I was asked to be a member, a 4-member team for the Rochester City School Systems. And they wanted us to come in and they wanted us to speak to the teachers up for a day or two and tell them that they shouldn't be racist, or they didn't use the language, that they needed to not discriminate, and they needed to be able to be integrationists or promote integration. And I said, that's stupid. And so the 4 of us came back and said, we won't do that because that won't work. What we will do is we'll create a series of community systems and groups that will be made up of folks who represent their community, everything from the business community, inside the school, parents, kids, who in that community are the policy and influence leaders. And they will come together, we will help them come together and how they decide they keep their school safe. And then we'll need systems of communication throughout the city, because real things could happen. We had a heavy John Bircher community in that time, in the community as well. And so we said we need to have the protection of people for the possibility of that.
Sure.
We said they're human, but the issue is that in Charlotte, which was kind of this isolated part of the city, which really is almost its own area, where it was a Bircher enclave for real. And when we first sent Black kids in there, they were attacking the buses because they were the first to start integrating, the system in that area. And so some of us from the religious community said, okay, we're going to ride the buses. And we're going to try and be in a way to say that we need to change the story. It's not okay. But we said that's sufficient. So one of the things is I had a couple of friends who were brothers of some of the people who were the Birch leaders. And so I asked if I could go meet with them. And my colleague, who was Jim, um, tall white minister, really powerful guy, said, well, I need to work with Black Panthers and others. So we started the sense of 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, we'd go meet with them when other people, they could be safe, so their neighbors and friends wouldn't know they were doing this. And we started with the frame of, you have children.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want your child to be safe in the school they're going to be going to? We have people who are sending their children here now. You're not making them safe. If you don't make them safe here, how are your children going to be safe? And that became common ground. We didn't have to like each other, but the issue is that
That's right.
safe became the area. So they bought into the plan. And so we actually had and I forgot to tell you, Rochester had riots. We had the whole dynamics of other stuff before. Everybody anticipated it was going to blow up. We actually had one of the most sane integration efforts and openings in the country. And we kept those systems in place as while people learn some new behaviors and begin to get to know each other. But I look at that over time, that led into, we need to have a different kind of school board, because the school board that we have doesn't have a vision and perspective of how to serve an authentically integrated population. So our next target was, and we worked with some of them, was we ended up and we unelected the school board. And we then said we had a superintendent who didn't have a vision, again, of inclusivity and common humanity. And so we in essence, worked through the political structure and made it possible he wouldn't be retained. The system then said, what we're going to do, we're going to have our process, we're going to have a national search. And we said, no, you're not. Because at this point, we brought the religious community together. We brought all the community organizing groups together, key figures in the community, power figures in the business community. And we said, John Franco is a principal who's proved he knows how to do that in his school. He's created this kind of thing in micro that we believe is what we need to be in macro in terms of the city. And so we said, no, you are going to hire John Franco. And so eventually they did. And so again,
it spun from one to another, and it just got bigger. Awesome.
But it's both. We also understood we had to have people on the inside, but on the inside who were going to develop different mentality, different policies and practices, and then incorporate them into a new construct that would sustain them.
And this was what decades?
This was 69, 70, going to mid 70s when we did all that.
So it was sort of prior to the.
It started 65 to 75 era in Rochester.
So you had a little bit of a more open, maybe local leadership. I mean, you had a movement of people wanting to move, not terrified.
Well, some of that got developed out of the Lewinsky thing. Quite honestly, the religious community, Black, white, religious communities were kind of disjointed, are not in right relationship during that period.
So it gave you an opportunity to bring fractured people together. That's the point.
That's what happened.
Excellent, excellent.
That's what happened. And we did that in other places. We took over model cities with a perspective of really getting in people. We had Joe Wilson at that time, who was the was the founder of Xerox, and he was a counterforce to Kodak, and created a kind of a body of people, progressive liberals of that time. He was one of the most honest, caring people. I know that may sound crazy, but that's how he saw the world, and how when he started Xerox, what he was trying to do. But he became a counterpole, so we were able to begin to deal with the whole system of the city in terms of how things went. And he had the clout in the business community for us to go in after some of those grants. So we actually created a sense of, we're going to rebuild some of the community. So we probably built a couple through the FIGHT program. That was the Black. We then said, but now people of color need to be in charge of trying to rebuild the community. So what had been the integrated group of FIGHT, which was Friends in Integration, I think, initially, it became
Friends, Integrity, God, Honor, Today.
Right, initially. And that was everybody. Then we said intentionally, we want to have FIGHT, which will be people of color, and we will have allies of FIGHT. like, but we will still work together. But we have different roles to play in that. And
Awesome.
over that next decade, we built a couple thousand houses. We changed government city policies. We got one of the first Black-owned factories at that time to provide jobs and stuff like that. We changed the school. So this period of time, you can look back at all this is on record in terms of the kind of understanding of change and transformative change that we were able to build. Now, on the other hand, what happened over a period of time, white folks started running.
White folks, what?
Started running.
Ah,
I mean, one of the things with the housing, Rose can talk about that if she wants, but the 19th ward, which was predominantly white, but had some people of color, made an intentional effort to be an integrated community. Because the real estate forces were so strong, they were trying to block bus, they wanted to get the money and stuff like that. So we set up our own real estate company. And
smart.
with neighbors and friends and volunteers so that people could sell their houses and market their houses, and other people could find out what was coming up, because the realtors would scare them away, or they would try and steer Black folks into the community, or whites away from the community. But actually, we stabilized that for a number of years, and it really was an authentically integrated community. Within the Black community, we went the other way and said we need to have a safe place for folks who haven't had the capacity to own homes before, have decent housing. We need to create it. So there's a moment in time, we really.
I think we are right here in Whatcom County. I think the pain is so great and the hurts are so deep and the fracturing is so real. And the thing that's incredible, right now we're at a point in time with $100 million coming in from federal money.
That's right.
If it was directed properly, this is the pivot foot that could launch massive change. If it is directed and controlled according to the domination system, it's going to be the death knell for a lot of businesses and groups, because it's going to be hoarded. So that's correct. It's the largest transfer of wealth, and it's either going to go into the hands of dominator models, or it could be used to actually be the pivot foot to spin out the true potential of this county. This county is one of the most richest counties in the nation. Seriously, and I'm not joking.
No, I understand. I'm agreeing with you about it.
Yeah, I used to run the Visitor and Convention Bureau. I built it out of, from the first guy who was the executive director. I was his personal, I was the office manager, and we built it from nothing, from a one room in the basement of the Leopold to 4 facilities in Canada, or in Blaine, Ferndale, Bellingham, and rest stop. Anyway, 44 volunteers. We have so much potential in this county. It's absolutely untapped. And if you put the port together with the city, together with the county, together with the small cities need economic development. Absolutely. They do, because the sales tax, the way it's been misdistributed, it's created such an unfair advantage that the cities are hobbled. The cities need revenue. That's why they agreed to pass these jail tax. I was sitting in one of the meetings. The reason they agreed to pass it was because the county said, oh, if you'll pass the jail tax, we'll make sure that we redistribute the money and that each one of you guys gets some money so you can invest in your. Well, you know what? You're talking victimizing and using and manipulating the small cities who need revenue and convincing. You're buying them off. That's not a good idea. You're right. We actually need to help those cities become vibrant, empower
themselves and self-sufficient.
That's right. And build the little tiny companies that can sustain, build little tiny pods of working economies all over the county.
You're right. That part, oops.
We can do that.
I have to go to the door. Rose, feel free.
That's fine. So yeah, I'm really excited, and I'm excited to have you on the call too, Rose. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience a little bit? I can't hear you. You're on mute still. And welcome to the call, Lorelei. If you decide you want to speak, all you gotta do is speak up. Or wave.
It's interesting as I was getting back onto Zoom for this session. On my way to Zoom, I saw an email that said September the 19th, the City Council invites feedback on funding priorities as part of its community voices on funding.
Wow,
So,
how awesome would that be?
yeah, so I don't know what that's about, and I haven't read the email. That was just in the headline part of it.
Well, that's a big headline. And that's one of the things that we need to be able to do also in our community is share the headlines of all these city and county council meetings, because that's one of the ways that people get fractured out. There's so many things going on in different places. Eventually you run out of steam trying to follow them all, and nobody's consolidating these events together. And it's just an administrative type task of putting all these things on one agenda for all these different places that you could coordinate. So that's another task to add to our task list. Keep going, Mel.
Well, one of the things I'm concerned about, Rose and I have talked about this too, is that in terms of people of color here, this is the first city we've lived in where there really isn't a centering place, a gathering place. There is no common, how do we gather, come together and what's going on. I know it's a small percentage, but one of the realities is if you're going to build this model and direction, at least my experience, we're going to have universal models and we have to have universal involvement. And so
you got to have universal watering holes and
right.
patterns. And what they did instead, do you know we have so many beer companies?
Yes.
The
Amazing.
growth of the beer industry, it's the only industry really. One of my friends who was a retail guy, he said,
right.
Look around the county and see what industries are actually making profiting. And it's all the microbreweries.
Microbreweries.
What a crazy thing.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons I was saying I really want to get to know you, because you understand the guts of the layering of what's going on. And I think I know a few other people we've met that do, but COVID, we didn't come into this community in the way we would have or ordinarily would in terms of coming into a city and exploring it and knowing it. We had friends here and others, but also if we had come in that way, we probably wouldn't have met you, because we wouldn't have come in and been involved with Buff. We didn't need to hear sermons and do stuff, but because we actually knew some people, we had some friends, other minister friends and colleagues, it became a touchstone base for us. And through that, we actually met some people through online, and we got to know real human beings that you wouldn't get to know if you walked into a church. And
That's right.
And so we and the pain and sharing because of the compactness of our time together and the long process of trying to deal with COVID, we aged significantly in terms of to really find real human beings. And so we've been trying to, our national association has made a commitment to be a beloved community. And I think I started that earlier. That's work Rose and I have been involved in all our lives, but in the Christian community at a point in time, the ecumenical interfaith work, but intentionally coming into Unitarian Universalism because it has a different structure. It is not a Christian, it had roots in Christianity, but in 1961, we joined together, the Unitarians and Universalists, and created a sense out of, we are a revelation, we are not rooted in God and Jesus, we are rooted in truth. And that truth is where it exists. And we have been helping people. We had 2 generations now to help people move away from the transitional time. We've created a whole developmental group now of people who've been committed to eliminating the oppressions. We have 7 principles that kind of are at the core of what we do. And we're now in the process of engaging the 8th, because we know that what we've done before hasn't dealt with the fact of having an authentically integrative, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural worldview. And so that's where we are in terms.
But Mel, hold on a second. You didn't say what the 7th principle is, which is respect for the interdependent web of life,
all
of which we are a part.
And the first one
Excellent,
is,
Rose. If
yeah,
you
go ahead,
could
Rose.
post, if you could post a link to the 7 principles in here, so for the chat room, that
the
would
worth
be
and
excellent.
dignity of
As
all
we're
people.
talking, putting those things in here is
The worth and
really going to
dignity of
help
all
us.
people is the first one. And because we have a very individualistic, faith-oriented faith, and that's one of the things about change issues, when you only say about dealing with individuals. No, I'm sorry, change is not just by individuals. Change is absolutely essential, but it's never manifest and sustained unless it's a collective effort. And
That's right.
it creates a tipping point of people who can, I always you talk about the 1-1. I used to say the 20%. What we were working is trying to change mentality and the commitment of rootedness of the 20%. And now I think there's good data in recent years that would say transformative change, transactional change happens if you get 25% in terms of changing the vision, that you really can flip and the system will convert. Because most folks, I used to say the 20-20, you got the 20 crazies on the one hand that wanted to be different. The 20% said, I ain't gonna give it up. I'll kill you if you try and take it from me. And a lot of folks, other folks in between, that will go with whoever wins, which is kind of, I'm seeing happen in the US right now. We're kind of at, the good news is we're at that position for actually having some transformative change.
Yes.
The reality is, and that was the thing, I'm going to say it out loud. We intentionally called ourselves Melrose Ministries for positive, transformative change. What I know is change will happen, but every change is not a correction. Every change is not a form of progression forward. And so even in talking about what we're talking about, the words we use to plant something in people's head are important. So I just wanted to look at that and think about that.
I agree with you 100%. That's why I use the term intentional, because I had to get it out of the unconscious, unintentional, follow the leader. And so the only word, because I'm looking at, I've learned that in the 21st century and when working on social media, you got to get it down to 1 to 2 words. 3 words is workable, but you've actually got to get it down to 1 or 2 words ideally, or it won't be the pivot word.
So I hear you, but I want to invite you to help me understand something.
Sure.
The people who are doing the best intentional change right now are the religious right.
I know.
And they're doing intentional change. They've been doing it for years.
Yeah, but they're not using that phrase. They're not using that phrase.
I'm not talking about the words. I'm talking about what they're doing.
Yeah, I know.
And so we need to be, and enough people do know.
Yeah.
They're getting to learn it's intentional. So I'm just saying, I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah, I agree.
That we believe that you put positive or transformative, that you have to lift that up as part of your vision. You know, and the whole DMA, if you're familiar with that theory and understanding, you have to put the wholeness of what you want into the world, the good and the bad. You have to put the negatives and the other possibilities, because that's the whole picture. And then you will for that what's going to become dominant or what emerges.
So one of the things that I can say about positive intentional or positive change is that the Christian right can also say that that's positive, which is bizarre, but in the language that we have in their perspective, that's positive. So one of the qualifiers, because I've played with these words and I look forward to having somebody talk about this with, because the only phrase that I could find that no one can subvert is if it's life enhancing. So, and I mean all life enhancing. If it supports life on the planet, then that's the phrase that I can use inside the joy triangle model and inside all of the other philosophies and the physics of change and all these other things that I'm working on. So my qualifier, when we start putting in measures, how do we measure the effect, is if there's a quality of life for the whole earth. Is there life enhancing? Is this a life enhancing change? If we're going to make a change, is at least one degree better towards what it is we're striving to go to. And if you can see that, then make that decision. if it's a back and forth and you don't find something that actually is making the world a better place, then don't change it. Keep fighting if you got to, I guess. But it's always, are we coming to a position that's making the world a better place as a whole, and the earth a better place? It's respect of life, respect of others, and respect of the world around you. Respect
We end up in
yourself.
the same station on
Yeah.
that perspective. But when I look at particular context, I'm looking at the United States of the context, that is not for many people a station they will visit.
Yeah,
They should land in. So part of it again is when we're looking at who we're dealing with, what's the language we have to understand and
that's
be
right.
to transform, because they can't jump to where you're talking about yet. That just,
Yes.
we don't need to hold that. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be said, but when we're trying to help people, trying to help people find their next right step.
So let's do it. Let's
That's
add
right,
that.
so-
Let's do it. I got it. I agree
Yeah.
with you.
So those are just some of the things. I mean, but I think what I've spent a time learning is how you create healthy systems and structures.
Excellent.
But I also am really clear, and Rose and I, this is what I was saying, and what we're wrestling, that's part of the meeting today. Most people don't believe that the earth is in danger.
Do you really think that's true?
Yes,
Wow.
I look at supposedly intellectual smart folks. I have been talking about, Rose and I have been talking about the environmental stuff for community
Decades.
for decades. It was, as a national leader of our justice work, that was always part of, if you look at our principles, it's there. The reason we're having the 8th principle is because everything, we had put in place a system that was predicated in creating a multiracial, multicultural faith system. And I see somebody's hand, sorry.
Are you wanting to say something, Frank?
No, I'm listening.
Okay.
Okay.
And, when I left, we had a journey towards wholeness. This was years of work. We actually educated people. We had workshops. We did training. We gave people tools for how to begin to see the world in new ways. We created transformation training teams.
Excellent.
And everything. That's something we know how to do. But sustaining it is the challenge, because in our governance system, every 4 to 6 years, 4 years at that time, and they could go for another term, you get a new president. And historically, people as presidents come in with their vision.
Mhm.
In terms of trying to transition our system, having people of color. We had our first African-American president of our association, one of the first in the country, to head a national faith group, Bill Sanford. And people being good people said another person who was a leader at that time was Latino. And versus a white female, very powerful, wonderful, comprehensive white female. And they ended up being competing for the next presidency. I was supporting her because she was an anti-racist. Peter's worldview was not, in my judgment and experience, anti-racist. And so because he was a person of color didn't mean that I thought he was the right person.
Right.
It was who had the worldview that was
Right.
forward. Well, he won. And a lot of people, because they thought, oh, well, our next step is to have another person of color. Well,
Yeah, they get fixated on detail instead of on
Ah.
the moral equivalence or the path forward. And that's one of the confusions.
right. And his vision was browning. His worldview is that the world will change because we'll brown ourselves over time. And the races will come together and the color stuff will be eliminated. And that's going to really change how we operate. But he was white framed. I mean, he was
Yeah.
exposed in his conscience to the framework of whiteness.
Yes.
And so over time, he undid and stopped doing all the things we had built in terms of policies and practices and hires that happened that violated the rails. It's kind of like, I don't want to, oh, don't do this now. It's kind of Donald Trumpish, but he wasn't like he was vicious about it. But
It
He-
was colonialism. It's entrenched.
It was colonialism.
colonialism attitude.
That's exactly
It's
right.
the dominator system following the dominator
That's
system.
exactly
You
right.
follow back into the habits of what you're used to.
And then people
don't
got
have-
comfortable. Again,
That's right.
because they knew that home, so they could go back there to some of them. So
Yeah.
we had a great explosion in 2017 in which some of the hires and some of the people of color who were up for some of the jobs in our system and stuff didn't happen. And there were crazy things that went on. And some of our white members said, hey, wait, there's something wrong here. We're not following through. The evidence of what we said we're going to do and what we're doing is not real. And we had some, one of those kind of, it was a come to Jesus moment in time, as I say that. And there were a number of really key, wonderful folks who were ready to resign and stuff, with some of the white leaders and others in our ministers group and others. And some of us said, no, you can't. This is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for the time where there's some white people that have the courage to try and create beloved community. This is the time you leave. This is the time you root in and you take over leadership.
Yeah,
And we work together to create something that we haven't yet experienced.
that's right.
So that's where we are. So we actually, and we've been doing all the changes in terms of profile and people courage and bringing people in, policy changes. We've done that on the national level. We've done that with ministers. We've actually redesigned our curriculums. We've done all kinds of stuff,
Wow.
create new capacities of people and worldviews. But now we're doing the thing, and this is why I'm coming back to where you are. Within a faith system, if you're going to sustain something and a value and have real transformative work, it has to happen at the local level.
It does. There's no other way.
Nations are. But that's the level. So we made that commitment and we flipped that. But what happened is what I was trying to say to some people, which is why that's what people missed in the 2017 experience. I said, we gave the power to the people and congregations to try and decide what their missions and visions would be, and then to help them to shape it. But we didn't equip them with enough of the insight,
That's right.
understanding, and the tools
That's right.
to work.
Yep.
And so they got the power, and they used the power for what they understood. So they brought back some of their own understandings back in.
That's one of the biggest problems we have with addiction recovery and people that we've gotten out of the system. Irene has really learned that, is that if you help people out or help them back into the society coming out of prison, if they've spent 4 years or 10 years or 20 years inside there, they're enculturated into that habit. And I mean, it's something so simple as if you've been incarcerated for a period of time, you don't open any door.
That's correct.
You don't open a door.
You get in trouble for doing it. You don't have an out.
You get deep trouble for opening a door. And if somebody says no to you, you say yes, period. You don't argue with them. So when we had somebody, Irene was telling you in one of the prior conversations, she was talking about, we were down in Olympia working to get these proper prison badges out of the system and getting people an actual ID when they leave the prison. I mean, think about this logically. Who has the better probability of giving you a legal identification badge based upon who you are than a government that has you incarcerated because they have you labeled with a name?
Right.
So who actually is the best equipped to have you leave prison with an ID badge, a legal identification badge, right? Or a license. We aren't doing that in Washington state. Most states don't do it. In Washington state, they spent a whole bunch of money to build a badge making system to meet the latest Homeland Security rules, so that they took your prison badge, literally, it's green and it says Washington State prisoner ID number such and such. And they were taking that prison badge and reprinting it on a new card with fancy numbers on it to prove that you were legal according to the Patriot Act.
Right.
But it was a badge, it's a prison ID
It's
number.
a prison ID card.
And they let you out with a $40 check.
Right.
And nothing else. You walk out of there, you're naked. You got some clothes on your back and you got nothing but a $40 check and a prison ID. And you try going to a bank and cash that $40 check.
Yeah.
Try to get on a bus.
You don't have any
Try to
idea.
do anything. You know what a banker's going to do? You walk in with a prison ID badge, They're gonna escort you right to the door and get you out of here. So
Call their
our
security.
calculation, yeah, our calculation minimum was that on the day of exit from prison, within days, roughly 28% of the population, according to our prisoners who were releasing, roughly 28% of the people coming out would end up back in the prison system simply because they didn't have proper ID. You can't get on a bus, you can't get on a train, you can't do these things. I mean, it was crazy. So Irene and I did a whole bunch of research. We went down to the state, we took them the data, we took them the plan, and we said, all you have to do, this is a famous phrase we use now, all you got to do is when you exit the prison, run an actual ID through the same machine. Oh, can't do that. That's Department of Licensing business. Well, you're the Department of Corrections. Who the hell's the Department of? What is this about?
You're taking money away from somebody, now you mess them, Johnny.
And we negotiated between, we had the DOC and the DOL. We forced him to come to a meeting room with this senator who helped us.
Okay.
We're
good.
sitting in the room. We're negotiating the problem. And you know what it cost to fix the problem? It would have cost, we forced it. And we found $24,000 is what it would have cost to reprogram a software solution
Right.
to print something. And, you know, we figured out that it was like $2.8 million a year that the taxpayers paid because we didn't have an ID at the point of exit. Minimum $2.8 million is it was going to cost the people, the taxpayers paying for the ID badges,
Right.
and the failures of these, at least 2.8 million for a cost of 24,000. What would it have taken to write off a check by somebody and just solve the problem? Nope. You know what? I still don't think we have a proper prison ID, a prison release badge. We fought and they tried to do pilot projects. They tried to do appropriation. It took one bureaucrat to make a decision to write a check for $24,000 to fix a computer glitch.
Yep.
We couldn't chase it down because that particular senator died. And we ended up having to come back and fight the jail tax. And so we couldn't continue to chase a statewide problem when we had a local problem that was burning holes in everybody's souls and pocket. So talk about fixing the system. We can fix the system. There's a whole bunch of places, and we need people like you, Mel and Rose, Ilona, Frank. We need Lorelei. We need people like you working on solutions, real solutions in local community.
Well, I think the important thing that you're doing, though, is that we have to help people believe there are solutions.
Yes.
And that's part of what's going on in culture right now. The issue,
Yep.
Yeah, the cycle again. We keep talking about it. This is a new time. No, it's no damn new time. This is the same thing that happened
The
with
cycles.
Jim Crow. It's the cycle. And the part of the problem is that you talk about those genes. A lot of people who, from those times, they didn't pass on the genes of humanity and common connection. And that's what's still missing within our culture. We do not have within white culture.
We have not in the past had, and we are now creating the belief that we have it. Sorry, I'm correcting
How
you.
they create, but that's been our work. I mean, one of the things is I laugh. When Rose and I married, it was only a couple of years after Loving was passed. And it's when I didn't even say that, we took over the seminary at that time because they had this new model of people coming together, Episcopalians, liberal Protestant folk congregations, Catholic, St. Bernard's Seminary, who I'm missing, the women's, help me, you know what I'm saying?
The Baptist Mission Training School of the Women.
Right, and joined with the University of Rochester into this, at that time, a new model of how
We could do it here.
sectional faith and come out and try and figure out how to work together in different ways. These are seminaries and the university. And the issue was that we needed to create holistic ministry, and not just to function in the church, but in the community, that we needed to work with health and well-being first of the minister. How do you become a healthy minister? You have to deal with your own issues and your needs. We had required courses. You had to enter into a no exit interview with another seminarian for a year, the first year you came. and your issue was to help you find out and know yourself. And then there was another section of group kind of interaction, in which is what are the kind of dynamics and factors of ministry that are changing and shifting that we need to help be empowered to figure out how to navigate. Now, that's all a good curriculum. That's one of the reasons I went there. It was also King's Seminary that was joining us, Crozer, and Bexley Hall, which is a progressive Episcopal seminary, which is mine. But when King was killed, the students there and a few of the faculty launched a campaign to raise $1 million to create the first Black church studies chair in a predominantly white seminary. We raised $500,000 the first year, and we were into the second year of doing that. And that's actually when I physically came on campus. But part of the commitment was they had also agreed that they were going to hire some more faculty. They're going to bring some Black members onto the board of trustees, begin to try and shift the perspectives and stuff. This may not matter to you. I don't know if you know the name. If I say James Cone, Professor James Cone, you know that name?
Not necessarily. I mean, no, I'm going to say no.
Excuse me, Mel, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second to say that I am going to leave
I
for
know you
now
do.
because I'm going to check out where you all have signed up for another workshop
Yeah, I was
that
wanting.
we're going to need for the 7th and 8th principles for discussion.
And thank
that
you.
we
honey,
are
'cause
leading in October, so I need to go to this other workshop.
Right.
Okay.
But thank you. It's been wonderful today. And I'll see
You
you
already read my
tomorrow.
mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing. And I look forward to having you on calls tomorrow if there's any chance you guys can continue to come. We've got another very rich list tomorrow. So Mel, let's ask, how do you see that we can use your wisdom today in Whatcom County, or even in the next couple of days, to actually tap into the wealth of wisdom and knowledge that you have to help us pull our interfaith communities locally and all of our different, so that we can cross these divides? Because the reason I ask is because Whatcom County thinks it's white.
Yes.
Okay. But in fact, in my experience, we have a lot of people of a lot of divides who all walk the talk as if they're whatever they think they are. But this is a colonialist county.
Yes, absolutely.
And so how do we start talking, not people of color or people of this or people of that or people of this? And people then get irritated with me because I'm a white woman. I'm not, then they think I'm I'm kicking out the people of color. No, I'm not. I'm just realizing that the Native people are not included in most of these conversations. There are the Black people, like you said, it's a sundown town. I didn't know the phrase because I didn't know the phrase. But you know what? There were some Black kids that were living in an apartment complex next to my white sons. Okay. And as I'm walking, coming back and forth, and I'm making friends with these kids. And at one time I sat and I went, I wonder what's actually happening to them, because people are telling me this and this and this, and we don't have racism and we don't. And I went, that's not my experience. I'm just going to ask these random kids what's going on with them. And so as they were coming out of the house one day, they're walking down the street and I said, you know what? I have a question. It's just a random question because I'm just asking questions. I got to understand. How many times a month do you get ID'd just for walking down the street? Oh my God. I could ask any number of other people. Nobody gets ID'd walking down the street. These boys got ID'd often, and I can't remember what the numbers were, but it blew my socks off. I just went, are you kidding me? I said, well, where are you walking? And they said, just down the street. I'm going to the grocery store. I'm coming back, whatever. And I said, you guys get ID'd. Why are they IDing you? No reason. And I went, oh my God. Oh my God. And then I started to talk to one of my Black friends who I had forgotten she was Black because she's been my friend for 25 years. And we're sitting talking about some stuff one day. She's from Vancouver. She lives here. She owned a house here. Her son and my sons were friends. all this stuff's going on. And I was talking to her about what it was like. And I said, so Loretta, you don't talk much about these other issues. And she says, no. And I said, what's up with that? Like, what's going on here? And she said, you really want to know? And I went, oh yeah. And she started to talk to me. She's a white-haired elder woman. She's a professional businesswoman. In fact, she was a stockbroker in Vancouver, Canada, working for Scotiabank, one of the biggest banks in Canada. And she said, let me explain to you what happens to me at the border every time. Let me explain to you what happens to my body every time any kind of a police car pulls up anywhere. Let me talk to you about what it's like being this and being this and being this. And the reason this conversation came up is because I was talking to somebody and they said, well, what does Loretta have to say about this? And I said, I don't know. I've never asked her.
Never
Well,
asked
she's
her.
black. Why don't you ask her? And I went, she's black? I mean, I literally, and I know that people say you have color blindness and they say, no, that's just a white thing. Loretta was my friend. I didn't care. I really didn't. And I didn't grow up in a county or a state. I grew up in Eastern Washington. We didn't have black people.
Right.
We didn't.
You don't know.
We had people. I had Native people, but I didn't know very many Native people. I didn't recognize my privilege. I didn't recognize their privilege. I didn't, because she was my friend. I just talked to her as my friend. But when I finally asked her about it, oh my God, I've actually got a recording of her talking about it when I was running for sheriff. And she started to talk about what she had to go through as a black woman. And she was Native American black woman. And she was a Native American black woman of lighter color than her husband, who was deep black color.
Colorism.
And then she started to talk, and he was military industrial complex from the South, and she was from Canada. And then she started to talk to me about all these different nuances around this whole story that I had never heard. I knew nothing about it. And it was really an eye-opener for me. And so in Whatcom County.
And how old are you and when did that happen?
A few years ago when I was running for sheriff.
I don't mean that facetiously. I was being.
No, I'm serious.
I know you are, and that's what I'm saying. That the issue is that most white people are miseducated and don't know it.
I had no idea.
And therefore are not trustworthy in relationship for trying to do real change with people of color.
That's right.
The most dangerous thing that most people of color encounter is the mind of a white person.
And that's why, even though I was working, now this is interesting, because one of the problems I had is that I'm working for people who are criminals, black, white, Asian, Native American, all these people, and I'm helping them all. I mean, I'm helping them all. And when I went to the conference where the women were holding the conference saying, we want you to come, and you're a woman, so come, you're one of the ones.
Right.
But when I showed up, they kicked me out, basically. Because they said, you're white, you white. And I didn't even get to say anything. They kicked me out as a non-prejudiced person, or as whatever they labeled me as, even though the very work I've been doing for 10 years was to serve people of all colors, including my own.
But you hadn't earned your props yet.
Huh?
You hadn't earned your props within those communities.
Not according to them.
And
I was criticized. I was actually expelled because I was working with criminals. I actually had a marginalization.
I understand that too. I'm not surprised. I mean,
yeah, it was amazing.
No, see, it's normal to me. I understand exactly what.
That's what she said to me. She said, this is just normal. And I went, oh my God.
And so part of what I'm saying, when you say, what can we do? And I'm saying is, we need to get to really know each other as human beings.
Absolutely.
And that's the first thing we need to do. The other thing is that there's some resources. I think, I'm one of the people many years ago, a lot of the work we did was to begin to do caucusing, to do racial identity caucusing. because people in their own groups say things and share things and experience things that they will not do in a collective community. And historically, especially, there's no reason for people of color to trust white people. And white people believe they're supposed to be able to know whatever people of color think and how they do stuff, when people of color are saying, you know, I don't necessarily need you trying to figure that out. All right, we're trying to figure that out ourselves, because this culture has never allowed us to have our chance to decide how we want to engage and how we want to be. So the 60s, and that was part of the 60s and 70s, was beginning to say, no, there are times and places, there's people's work. You know, the Aboriginal people, I have also connections to Aboriginal folks, and part of the beauty of their culture is there's women's work and there's men's work. It's not sexist.
Boy, I know.
Worldview in terms of, and it takes everybody doing their job to have a safe and human community. That's not a principle America is operated from. But in terms of the world, as I talk about building the love community, that's the concept we've got to build in. That's the concept I brought to Unitarian Universalism and tries in my work. And all the things you're saying, there are white people, I got cussed out, blessed out. We'd have some of our workshops and we split them up. We tell people why. And there was a time that people would not want to do it. Now, but people did women caucuses, and they understood that one of the things I could do in Unitarian Universalism is that women were the first group to deal with their oppression by simply saying no to it, refusing to cooperate.
So right now, so let me ask you a question, because I want to challenge you and me and Lorelei and Alona and Frank to a bigger question. Right now, the oppression is so deep across every place. And we just introduced the concept of caste systems as the empire caste, the middle caste, and then the excluded caste. And we can't, it's my opinion at this point, because of the amount of pain I've had to deal with in trying to cross all these boundaries, as soon as, because the criminalized caste, the oppression is so deep and the bullying of our poor is so deep, it crosses all these racial boundaries. It crosses all these cultural boundaries.
Yep.
It crosses everything. So one of the ideas that I have is that James White, funny, last name's White. James White is my friend from Vancouver, BC. Alona knows him, but he's worked for 38 years in downtown Vancouver, working with Asians and all the people of disabilities is what they called it. He's actually started I forget, it's a Sadako co-op. It's about teaching people how to actually become leaders, even if you have disabilities. Diverse abilities is what he's talking about. So he has a program to invite people basically how to become human, and within it he can cross all of these different barriers. So I think it would be exciting at some point for all of us who are working together at any level to do this workshop with him. It takes around 4 hours in any group, just to be able to identify who are you as a human being, what do you care about, what are the things that drive you crazy, what are the things that people can do to support you and help you manifest your destiny. Anyway, it's a whole series of questions, and it's designed on purpose to have people be able to come together as humans, as opposed to as classes or races or this or that or the other thing. So I'm just saying that's one of the things that I want Jim
Would
to
you let me just break for just one? I need to pick up something just for a minute.
You bet. Good. Ilona, what do you think?
I think this is all really good. I've been sitting a bit on a hot plate for a bit, and I wasn't quite sure if and when to actually raise my hand, because I look at this question as a German who lived in South Africa and spent a lot of time in Africa, and this is basically an issue of I mean, it's a worldwide issue, but it's an experience of Black people in white countries. And so I actually, sorry, I just kind of lost my train. Oh yes, there was something I wanted to share because I felt it was relevant in terms of what we've been talking about. Just to give you a bit more background, I moved to South Africa in 1996. And that was just after, I mean, Nelson Mandela was freed, I think in 92, 94 had been the first free elections. And I shared a bit yesterday about my childhood experience with this Black man. My first memory of the news, the world news, was the uprisings in Soweto in 1976. So I had an awareness of what was going on in South Africa from a very young age, for some reason. And a number of people had told me again and again to go there because it's such a beautiful country. And I remember I said, I'm not going to travel to South Africa as long as that system is there, because I don't want to support it in any shape or form. And so when I finally went, it was such an awakening for me in so many different ways. But what was fascinating is because Black South Africans didn't talk to white South Africans about their experience at all. And the reason was, I think, similar to what you've been talking about, that they just couldn't, there was too much experience and too much pain there to actually open up and make yourself vulnerable to such a thing. What really humbled me enormously was that the fact that I was white, but not from South Africa, made me a white person who actually people talk to. And I talked to gardeners,
Right.
you know, to taxi drivers, and everyone told me their story. And for the first couple of years, I only had Black friends in South Africa because I couldn't relate to the white South Africans. And so I was in a very funny kind of situation in there. And I was in an insurance company that had been white run. It was, for South Africa, a pretty advanced company. They had black people in there. They had also been supporting Black people into leadership and management positions. But now there was a rule of Black empowerment. And so there was a lot of management courses that were introduced in order to empower Black people and also create a community or a company where you had two separate countries in one country, essentially, and bring it together in some way. And one of the exercises we did, which really opened my eyes at the time, was that we actually split the group. It was Black South Africans, white South Africans, and then me. And they were split into Black and white people. Both got a blackboard or whiteboard to write on. And the job was to describe your childhood experiences. So it was up to about eight years. And I was lumped in with the white South Africans because obviously that fitted. And I was really amazed when we shared all our experience, how similar my experience was to their experience. And what really blew everyone's mind afterwards was when we brought it together and we just looked at those two boards, you would never have thought they lived in the same country. And they didn't, because it was two universes. And the black colleagues and friends had been growing up with being scared because police raids were happening. You weren't sure whether you were safe when you're coming back from school. Your parents were constantly petrified that something happens to you when you go outside, and all those kinds of things. And just that awareness, that sharing really brought, it basically equalized or brought something together, because once you see that you live in two completely different worlds, even though you're next to each other. I mean, in South Africa, it was segregated, so they weren't directly interacting, but it was geographically just next door. And I think those kinds of experiences is really what brings it together. I mean, another thing that that I remember is that in 1996, it was the first time that Black and white children went to kindergarten together. And so what they realized is that, and it was a bit like what Joy was describing, that that they became friends and they were colorblind. You know, the children, the 4 or 5-year-old children didn't realize that one was black and one was white. There were some really funny stories about, you know, when they were talking about differences and kind of, I don't quite know what the story was, but it was like, okay, you know, I'm wearing different colors. They didn't realize that the skin was actually different. And it was something that the parents taught them, you know, and so, so I don't know how practical this is in this current context. That's why I've been, you know, why I have been quiet. But it's an acknowledgement of each, that we're all different. And I mean, Joy has been saying that again and again. We're, as individuals, we're all different because we're all unique. But within our communities or within our defined, you know, whether it's skin color, whether it's churches, whether it's nationalities, we are also different. And so in my experience, it's really, really helpful to just acknowledge that and say that, and basically say, I don't know what your experience is, and you don't know what my experience is. Let's not make any assumptions and meet on the fact that there's pain on all sides. And let's step beyond that. Let's be vulnerable and then talk.
Yes.
And if I don't trust you, I'm not going to follow you. I mean, we can't go anywhere if we don't have a level of trust.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. That's why you can't just do this individually. We have the cultural distrust.
Yeah.
That, doesn't make that possible. And I've done this work for time, created group. In other words, in terms of transformative change, it gets to be transactional over time. You can look at our histories of how that's done. I have I have friends who I trust with my life who are white. I have a wife I've lived with, I trust with my life. And because I know that, number one, she is, this I don't know, I'm using this one only because this is a book I think most people who are doing this kind of work would have read by now, or have exposure to at least understanding the concept. Is if you're going to do work in this country, then you have to be an anti-racist. Mm-hmm. And not all good people who care are anti-racist.
Yep.
And different people are on their journey for it. But if you're going to try and lead, you can't lead something unless, you know, as I say, what I've been working with this faith group is to help white people have a different identity than being white. And anti-racist is an identity we put out there to say, we can't change, and we did not decide what race we were going to be. Number one, race is a stupid concept, in fact, but it's not, because we treat it as if it's real. The 1/10 of 1% of our skin, which is a protective thing. If you know the history of that, you know that's not real. We turned it politically into a way of defining people. And in America, we've made that a critical factor in defining people. That is not, in fact, so that's not how you measure human beings. We talk about heart and other stuff, but that's not how most people are measuring when we see. So behavior is how we react and respond and integrate. We work with each other in that sense. That shows whether we're being human beings or not. And I'm simply saying there is not a lot of history of that, Roy, within America, period. That's just actually factually true. So we're trying to create the not yet. Now, I have a lot of I have white relatives I grew up and I love. I have white relatives who also know how to culture code. They know when they are on the outside world, what they need to do to be successful as a white person in the culture. And they know when they come back into the family, what it means to be a human being within the family. So I've watched people over decades learned how to do that and have to do it. And I know how to do it. I know how to do that within people of color cultures. Because in an interracial situation, like I've been in the kind of positions and places I've been, most people wouldn't trust a male like me married to a white woman, light skinned and stuff like that. So that because the culture said you can't trust people like that. And yet, so part of that is, but there are ways to deal. What I'm saying is there are ways. So if you're saying, I think you have things to share, I think I have some things to share. What we need to do is to create some time and space and commit to trusting each other to, and let that sharing take us where we can go. And,
I agree.
and so what I was going to say earlier is that I can work with people because I worked with the whole faith system of folks who weren't anti-racist, but folks who said they believed in truth, instead they believed in justice and democracy. And in our faith, revelation is not sealed, which means you can change. You can become something else. And I have a faith system where I can look at it historically and see how transformative change has actually happened. It's not theoretical. God is not the final word. The whole, we can create our new realities, and the onus is on us. I mean, if stuff you're saying is basic to Unitarian Universalism, is how our faith operates and what we teach and preach. So, but many white people are still constrained by that. Because they are, I'm liking what you said in terms of, you are a white traitor, but you're a white traitor in a good way because your humanity was seen, when I say that, when you were in South Africa, in that sense that because you didn't buy into the white culture, because you weren't shaped by it, people could look at you and say, oh, maybe she's different. And as they got to know you and saw you interact in relationship in real life, your living and lived experience said, this is not an Africana.
So what if?
Pardon?
So let me ask you a question, because this is something that constantly comes up, and I want to find a way to break through it in a way that doesn't throw us back into warfare, cultural warfare, okay? Because what we just talked about is the fact that we've got a colonialist domination system.
That's correct.
And it may have come from a white Western European culture, but it has become a pervasive culture. I don't care which culture you're in anymore. Even in the Native American culture, the Native American culture has become enculturated into colonialism. So within the
Correct.
Native people,
Correct.
the individuals of families fight with other families for colonial domination. So what if we could host meetings that were about talking about colonialism and how the colonialism is permeating and breaking across and fracturing all of our cultures, all of our backgrounds, all of our trauma bases, and be talking about how do we move from that position into a holistic humanizing system? Because I've been trying to find the language around it, because as soon as you bring in the certain of these subjects that have been trigger words for generations, civil wars have been fought over them, and all these things happen, what it does is it shuts down certain communications, sort of like I can buy the conversation around extinction, because what you said makes sense to me. We are in fact dealing with extinction issues, and those extinction issues are directly related to colonialism.
Correct.
But if I use certain words, if I walk from the environmental system into the business system, into the nonprofit world, into the mental health world, because I've been crossing all these boundaries for 50 years, and it's been fascinating. And the only language that I've been able to work with is the human body. How does the human body work? How does it feel? Because our emotions transcend all of these things. in my experience, and our human physiology transcends all of these things, and the system that creates the racism, the system that creates the religious wars, the system that creates all this cultural oppression and domination is this system. This is this oppression system. So I'd like to propose how we can have conversations in our community to build trust. Because, like, for example, one of the people who spoke in the chat here said that her husband is white, and yet when he walks downtown because he's wearing the wrong clothes, he gets carded.
That's correct.
So it's not a racist issue, it's a colonial issue. And I found that some of the most, the colonialized people can be people of color or people of supposedly no color. But if we're white, we also have color, just a white color that's different. And so learning to cross-pollinate all this complexity and make it simple, how can we bring it to, to building this trust factor so that we can listen beyond?
Well, I think that, this is part of the, that's been my, as I said, my life work.
Uh-huh.
And it happens in different ways. I think one of the things is, I was going to ask, what I want to say is, I think if we get together, there's some resources and things I'd want to talk. I also was part of the founding of Crossroads Ministry for Anti-Racism Training, Education and Training. Crossroads operates from the very perspectives that we're talking about. The current director of that is Robert Diaz, in fact. Started with Joe Bart, white male, who was a race traitor, in the sense that he knew he was a racist, but he knew that wasn't all he was, because he was also committed to humanity and being a human being in his ministry, and married to a Latina person, and committed to a community for everyone. And Dismantling Racism was the first book that he did many years ago in the religious community. And we started a campaign to try and train people, to educate people. We call it educating people and training. And then, but the goal is to, you don't pray, educate, workshop oppression away, you organize it away. But in order to do that, you have to have an accurate assessment of what your situation is and an understanding of what your hope outcome is. And then to create structures of dismantling and then remantling and creating the new place and space. So that's part of what we've done, teaching people how to do that, create teams. So one of the things I'd want to make sure is that your group, this group, I would like to get us to know each other better. That's because
I totally agree.
I am reaching out and saying, Rose and I are saying to each other, that this is one of the first places as a system that we can talk as colleagues and peers. There's not a lot of, this is not a community that has that level of consciousness per se. There are other communities where we go in and we've been part of that consciousness as part of the community itself.
Yeah.
And there aren't people here, don't get me wrong. And I think, but you're right, because people, some of it has some opportunities to create stuff. And I know Frank may have been trying to get in and out. I'm not sure, because I know he said his
No, I think he's okay.
I don't want him to
I'm
be
fine.
killed. Okay, just to be clear. So I think part of it is we let our hearts talk to each other. And
I agree.
we actually, Tragic Investment, which is a book that James Addington's written, I think is some of the same kinds of things. He and I were among the early developers of Crossroads. He lives in Lummi Allen now. He's been here a couple of years. In fact, we're getting ready to bring him in to work with our UU network and stuff to do, utilizing his book. We tested this online like you did recently in terms of looking at and understanding the foundations of how we created the frame that we're all living in now to help us understand it. And we actually can do it in a variety of ways, but most recently we tried doing it online, use in about a series of sessions, an interactive kind of thing. I'd like to at least share that with you, make you aware of it.
I'd love to
I'm
read
going to
it.
ask you, have you read this book? Have you read How to Be an Anti-Racist?
No, I have not.
Have you read Isabel Wilkerson's Cast?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. Let's talk about that. Have you dealt with nice racism, white for Billy?
Right fragility. I've read a lot of this stuff, and yes, we can talk about it. I don't really want to record it
No,
today.
no, no, I'm not saying, I'm
Yeah.
asking you questions as you had. Then
Sure.
the issue is, what do we share in that? That gives us some bridges to be able to talk to each other.
That's correct.
Have you read 1619?
16:9, no,
Because-
not specifically, but I know the subject matter.
But yeah, the
I've
issue
had discussions around it.
and the
Yes.
people you're working with are people we need to take, because if we start from other places than this, especially if you're going to work with people of color right now, it's called about building the trust, doing the homework. So other people can say, we can have a conversation, or understanding the language that we can use our own language, but make sure the other person understands what we mean by the language, so we can end up at the same point. We have to learn that. We haven't had this kind of experience in our culture
I agree.
very often, okay? And so we have to teach those of us who even are on the early adapters, and folks are being creative, catalytic learners and stuff, our leaders. I have to work with leaders. I joked about that. You were off, I think. I said the most difficult people often in making real change are teachers, ministers, and medical professionals.
So guess who you are?
And
Guess who?
business
other people.
leaders.
Okay,
And
so there you go.
business leaders.
So there we go. We got to deal with all of us.
And you and I share, so you'll find out we've done so. I laugh because we may even be somewhere in those ancestor lines. So many of the things you've talked about and experiences of how you think and where I think are so on board, you would not believe it. And so that's why I said, Rosa and I said, we're going to reach out and say, we'd really like to get to know you all better.
Yeah.
Because you have things that I can see bringing this even, I know that the learnings from Crossroads would help a lot of this be able to be on the ground in a way that truly is universal. And in a different way. I also believe that there are other people of color who are doing some of the same kinds of things you've done, but also may have a different angle of analysis.
Sure.
So we need to find a setting. What I've tried to do in the past is try and bring often groups together and begin to discover what they can share, and what out of that comes organically takes us all to places that we could never get there if we didn't ever come together. And so this is
So
why.
let me ask you, we've got 5-10 minutes left here before the call is over. And I want to raise the awareness that technically what we're dealing with in the next 2 days on this call, we're dealing with emergency conditions.
That's
So
correct. I heard
we
that.
can do the leadership and the big, deep collaboration, because one of the things that I'd like to invite us all to consider is that over the next several months, we have to build leadership collaboratives. And this question of all these issues that come from your historical background and your training in religion, I had none. I mean, I intentionally never went into any of those programs as I went along, because I'm a nature person, and I listen, and I have all my life. That's what I do. And that's
part of me too.
that's my place for understanding what's true and
Right.
what's not for me. So we need to be able to allow all of these different people from all these different cultures to come
Absolutely.
into a common ground where we can become human together, because what we have to do. So it's interesting. Sometimes I feel like I'm straddling the Grand Canyon, and I don't have any poles to
Yeah.
hold settle, because
Balance.
oh my God, it's like when I watched the Flying Walenda brothers, or whoever the hell it was, walk across the Grand Canyon. I'll never forget watching this guy.
Right.
I mean, it was terrifying.
This
Oh
little
my
wire,
God.
yes.
Are you kidding me?
Right.
And so I've done a lot of these different weird things, and yet we are now at a crunch phase, and we have to sort of implode all these things that are our historical backgrounds and get into this place so that we can trust each other enough right now to help us over the next 30 days. Like this is September. Okay. We've got 30 days, 45 days to put some of these systems in place, regardless of our color, our creed, our religion, or anything else. We actually have to put timelines in place and help people get a communication system in place so that lives can be saved regardless of any of our
Yeah, no, I
differences.
got that.
So we have to do that. And then at the same time, build these platforms of leaderships and the scaffolds of behavior so we can look at how do we bring the interfaith coalitions together? How do we bring these
That's
political
long term.
cultures?
You're right.
Yeah.
You're trying to get a coalition of the willing to deal with.
Yes.
Well
said.
And I understand that. That's why I wanted to put that in context.
Yeah.
And I'm in the middle of, quite honestly, doing some stuff nationally in terms of trying to save our democracy, working with a number of groups. And so that
I understand that.
and to be candid. So, and I don't know the local scene, but I'm willing to learn. And what I do know is I think what I do have is some experiences that as I see people working together, I think I'm good at asking questions and helping people educate me about why something,
Yeah.
and what needs to be done. I don't know the local scene. You all know the local scene. I think, and you have history. What I'm appreciating about is you have a good analysis. I think the mapping, the issue of that is you've done a lot of mapping that can help people understand this.
That's it.
We did something, I laugh because we created in Charleston the Center for Budget and Policy because legislators didn't have good information. They couldn't know how the business community and others had it. So we created a citizen group to put together folks from the community, community organizations, nonprofits, and others. And we ended up doing it ourselves initially and getting funds to create a Center for Budget and Policy to provide people with a people's view of budgets and policies.
Brilliant.
And so that the counter for us. Of course, what happened is at a period of time, we got very successful. But the Republicans pumped a hell of a lot of money into West Virginia, but they made that the test ground for how they were going to take over the next level of legislators around the country.
Yeah.
So there's history. So we have things to share.
Yeah.
We can educate people about. So that's why I'm saying I want to talk at different levels.
Yeah. I love it.
But right now, and that's why you're moving us towards something. I'm willing to help you teach me and see what needs to be done. I have to look at how much I can commit to that, not because,
Absolutely.
but I'm accountable in some other systems right now.
Absolutely.
I want to know that this is not the only time this problem is going to be here. And I think your frameworks and some of those charts you say, I can see how we could use those in our congregations.
Use them.
Of the country to help folks who are trying to do what we're trying to do because it's concrete. And it'll have to be tailored for their own settings, but it gives frameworks that make sense. They give frameworks that people can create to build around. The trust comes from doing things together.
I agree.
Around something that makes sense where you are and you care about. You got a vested interest in. That's how you begin to get something done. You care about something, and other people come together. You don't know each other half the time, but in working together and caring together, you grow to another level of trust and intimacy.
Yeah.
That's got to happen in Whitecomb County. That's not going to happen in 30 or 60 days, but there's a real need to deal with something and to deal with that. So I'm able to keep those things clear.
Yeah. Good.
So
I'm excited.
I'm looking at, are we willing to maybe really explore together a longer kind of relationship with, and we'll figure it out. I'm not asking for promises, we're not signing contracts, but I'm saying that in our hearts, it was worth willing, and we don't know all the people there, but this was, we've been around the fields, a lot of fields around the blocks. And this feels like a block that we think we'd like to run in.
I love it.
So let's find ways to do that. I know you're getting off.
Actually, sorry, can I just interrupt for a second?
Absolutely. In fact, interrupt me. I'm talking.
Because I'm going back to Germany next week or I'm going up to Vancouver. So I would love to meet in person before
Oh, great.
would that be okay? And I mean, I don't know, Joy. I know Joy is
Where are you now?
I'm in Bellingham.
Well, we're at Bellingham now.
Yeah, well, I mean, she came here. I didn't know Ilona 3 months ago or 6 months ago or
I was
whatever.
wondering how long you know each other.
No, we haven't known each other
Closest,
very
by the way.
long. We developed really deep relationship, and she came here on purpose to help us understand the complexity that's here from an economic
She
standpoint.
did a great job.
Because until we unraveled this, I knew we had with this huge economic boondoggle here, but I couldn't get people to grapple with it because it's like it was such a cesspool. We couldn't diagram it. I couldn't get the conversation. And Ilona has the conversation. And I went, my God, do we need you? And because I was looking at catabolic economic systems as opposed to anabolic or creative economic systems. How come we are in such a deep entropic state from an economic standpoint? Why are we killing ourselves? I couldn't find people locally who wanted to have that conversation. And so when Ilona was I told another friend of mine who was traveling through the area, he'd been in Africa. He knew Ilona from there. And he said, Joy, he says, I got a friend. And I went, send her my way. And so we started talking, and suddenly she was willing to fly across the country and live here part-time. I mean, just live here for a month. And then it ended up 2 months, 3 months. And now she's going back home and planning to come back here. But she came here on a whim and God, we got to see what's going to happen. And it's developed. I mean, oh my God, we have so much wealth here just on the people on this call and with the people that I've been developing around the nation. And each one of you has relationships around the nation.
That's the point.
And we can come together as teams because we are just humans.
And I think this technology allows us to come together in a way that we could not have done it before.
That's right.
It's affordable and networks. I'm serious. I am one of those people who say I was born with a third eye, and I'm a hoop holder and the sheep carrier, red sheep carrier, and my other traditions. And so I don't know if you all know what those things mean, but it's part of that. I know when things are. I'm a pathfinder and a connector and a hoop holder.
Yep.
And this is a moment in time. That's what I'm saying. Say your name properly for me, please.
Ilona.
It is Ilona, right?
Yeah.
Ilona. I want to make sure.
And I make leaps of faith. That's why I'm here. I had an intuition I needed to come. Neither Joy nor I knew how and why. And I just said, well, the only thing I can do is follow that intuition. And that's how I've been living my life. And it's guided me all over the planet.
I understand that. That's the way I look at it. I got you. You understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Almost from your first words, we were on the plane.
Yeah, that's what I felt too. Yeah.
And so I would value that. And so let's just make it happen. Let's get together and face to face.
Let's talk about that in just a minute. Let me close up the call and let's hang up and get off the recording. And I just want to say that this particular conference, this session was about conversations. That's the point of the third session of each one of our days, is for us humans to come together to really talk and hash out some of these things that show up, because the conversations that we start with, we pose the whole point is we propose a context, like a belief system or something, so that the conversations we have next have something to butt up against, right? So we have something to allow our thoughts and our consciousness and our feeling to talk about, right? Because we got a placeholder now. We got something that we can, it's not a debate, it's really a conversation, but we have a context within which to have a conversation. And then The second, that's what the second one's about. And then the third one is about humans talking about human issues, which is what we're working with. And so, and this whole conference for the last 5 days was intended to pose a provocative question. We got a problem. And then, so if you'll notice, there's 5 steps in my trauma down cycle. There's 5 steps climbing up the other side. So there's 5 days, and they were positioned on purpose in a pattern to open the trauma, to open the construct,
You did that.
to open the debate, to expose the conflicts so that we could go to the next level, so that we could find a way to move forward into the next dimension. And that's everything I do follows these patterns of 5 and then 9 and then 27. That's the way that nature works anyway. So we might as well follow the pattern and let the rest of it go. So that's where the patterns come from. So we've done the first 3. Tomorrow is a next step. It follows the pattern of saying, okay, how are we going to move from the trauma place, from the argument place, from the differences of cultures, the differences of backgrounds, the differences, to come together to look at the real trauma problem, the real human problem over the next 60 days that we are dealing with in Whatcom County. We're dealing with 90 days. And I'm dead serious about 90 days, because that's the way the cycles are working here. And it's also the point at which the coalition has to decide whether we're going to receive funding from anywhere or not. Because we've been working on no win, no money, no anything, the support, because we're dealing with criminals. We've been marginalized, and yet we have bills that we have to pay. We have life that has to move on. But Lorelei and Marcus and all these nonprofits are currently fractured all over the county, and our whole community has been fractured and traumatized. And so and we have a domination system that is pushing hard to polarize and extremize. And I see patterns to that extremism. And we are being targeted hard in this county to force us to submit to a domination system that is not healthy for us. And if we lose in the next few months, it's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. We've got a winter system. So we are in a civic collision. We have been in a civic collision for 2 years. We have to reduce the civic trauma. We have to deal with the shock factor. We have to deal with getting new life blood and flow to the people who are taking the brunt of the hit in this community, which is the people in poverty and their volunteers. And there's 1,500 volunteers who have not been allowed to speak, and they've been traumatized. And the people who have been hazed and bullied, and if I don't want to use the term genocide, they have been extincted from our civic system. And our civic center has been hurt. It's been stabbed in the heart by betrayal. And so how are we going to transcend through that, rebuild the civic heart, rebuild our trust in our systems when we don't even trust each other yet right now, because we've been so fractured? So this is about bringing our civic heart together and figuring out how to do it. And the coalition stands ready to help us do it at any level, anywhere, anytime. We've been trying, and we would love to have the honor of helping bring people together to do that. So I want to thank every one of you for being on this call. And if anybody wants to say closing comments before we close the recording.
I'd love to hear Frank's reflection, because I felt like I talked so much.
Good, yeah.
Okay. A quick reflection would be that faith, very much a foundational pattern. Above faith, it's probably understanding, and then above understanding is a knowing. And I have a suspicion, possibility that knowing is what is bringing us together. Thank you.
I know you are right.
This knowing, do any of the rest of you want to give some closing words before we close the conversation?
No.
Okay. Thank you for showing up. Thank all of you for being here. Thank you for being willing to put your opinions and your voices and your thoughts out so that we can talk about these things in public and we can begin this process of unsilencing. I actually wanted to put that phrase out there, to unsilence, because people have been silenced at every single level. And learning to unsilence ourselves and the friends around us who are hurting, and then learning to do it with decency is important. So thank you all for being here. Tomorrow morning's agenda is all about making the case for community investments, and that's cost, benefits, and gains. Debbie David, the woman who you met this morning and have met a couple times, Debbie is the woman who's going to be bringing us a lot of information, and we're going to have an interactive conversation about adverse childhood experiences, various different kinds of our mental health and neuroscientific solutions, various challenges and problems we have in DSHS or in taking care of our children in foster care. We're going to be talking about disabilities and diverse abilities as we're now rebranding the conversation. I'm hoping to have James White here. He's the fellow from Canada. He might not be able to be here tomorrow. He'll be here for sure, I think, on Friday morning. I think he's traveling tomorrow, so he'll be here on Friday morning to have conversation. But not just Debbie, we also will be inviting other people who have knowledge about how do you bring people together when they've already been kicked out of society. They're hurting, they're broken, they're injured. How do we bring them together and help each other? Because that's a big, big, big subject. And in Whatcom County, we have not been doing as good a job of that as we could be. The whole conversation tomorrow is reversing the domino effect. The second part of tomorrow morning's conversation, which will happen at 1 o'clock, is intentional living, tiny home villages, and reinculturation. And for that, I've invited Doug Gustafson from the tiny home village that's in Fairhaven and the one that's over by Civic Field to talk about it. We've got other people who will be talking about tiny homes and how to do sustainable living and how to turn this into a community-led effort as opposed to another top-down domination effect effort, because that's the push of our community, to try to force these tiny home villages to make all the entrance to their villages through the Opportunity Council. And as we've heard, that doesn't work so well. We really do need independence and the ability for people with lived experience to manage those facilities. It saves us enormous amount of money and time and effort and gives us a better return on investment. And then the third part is Shanae Keltz will be here in the afternoon. You may have met her earlier. She's the woman who was one of our clients originally. She's done an enormous amount of healing after having dealt with, she's going to show you her 24 arrest mugshots tomorrow. So you can see who she was when she started and how she transitioned and who she is today. So, and she's going to talk about how do we do a rehabilitation, recovery, reintegration, retraining, and how do we help people actually become workers and employees and free enterprise people in a living community where we're not constrained by our past history or our color or our culture or whatever it is. How do we actually build a local living economy for real using this hub place that we're talking about, which is the Restore a Life Center. It's a hub for connecting all these different organizations through it. So she's got a vision for it. It builds, she's got a practical experience with living in these kinds of things, trying to bring them all together. Irene had the original vision, so Irene will also be here. So it's going to be a holistic plan tomorrow. And then on Friday, we'll be talking with the people who are working street on in the interfaith groups, bringing people together, dealing with real stuff that's grassroots. So thank you all for being here, and we'll see you tomorrow.